This story takes place at my dad's old house in Arizona. Most of the experiences are his, and a few are mine. But this story starts when my dad first started renting the house. He had been living there a few weeks when he met his neighbors. And, out of nowhere, they asked if he knew about the woman who had lived in the house before him. My dad said no. So his neighbor went on, telling him that there was an old woman who lived there for quite a while, before she passed away in the master bedroom. He said it actually took about a week before her body was discovered. Now my dad wasn't really a believer in the paranormal or ghosts or anything of the sort, so we thought nothing of it. He pretty much ignored the story for a while, not really sure what to think of its validity, considering the landlord never told him of such a story. So then the summer comes around, and I was to spend it at my dad's house. I had never been there before, and it was a nice little place. I was happy to have my own little bedroom to stay in. Visiting my dad those few weeks were the best weeks of that summer, but a few strange things happened. The first weird thing I noticed were the cats. There were always stray cats coming to the house, always hanging out in the front yard or on top of one of the cars. My favorite was the Siamese mother cat and her little kittens. I didn't really think it could have anything to do with something paranormal. But now that I look back, the sheer amount of cats that just came to the house was definitely strange. I mean, dozens upon dozens of them came to our place. This second thing happened when I was at the house one day alone. My dad, his girlfriend, and his roommate were all working that day. It wasn't the first day I was there alone, but it was definitely the scariest. It was the afternoon and I had to use the bathroom. I was finishing up and washing my hands when I suddenly heard a huge crash from the kitchen. I jumped, a little freaked out. It sounded like some glass was breaking all over the floor. I rationalized it must have been my dad's roommate. He must have been off work early. So I called out to him, "Dave?" Now the bathroom I was using had two doors, one that went out to the kitchen and one that led into my dad's room. As I walked into the kitchen, I didn't see anything. Not a thing. I was really freaked out now because I knew I heard something break. I mean, it was right outside the bathroom door. I was sure of it. I searched every room, thinking someone maybe broke in. But when I walked down the hallway, I saw a shadowy figure dart into my father's room. I froze in my tracks. I was way too scared to enter and ran the other way. Then I called my dad about what happened, and I hid in a corner of the living room behind the couch until his roommate actually got home. Even still, I waited outside for my dad the next few hours until he came home from work. Honestly, I was that scared. I kept thinking how there was no way I imagined that. I heard something loud crash. I couldn't have imagined it. And that figure darting in the hallway. It was no shadow. It was right there in front of me. Luckily, my dad felt bad, and he said he believed me. The last week I was there, nothing else seemed to have happened. But I always felt on edge. I felt like I was being watched in that house. But the next few events happened to my dad. He said he was coming home from work one day with his girlfriend, and when they got inside, he went to the bathroom while she got started on dinner. He had the door to the kitchen closed, but he left one open that connected to his bedroom. He said that as he was washing his hands, he looked up, and indirectly across from him, he saw a figure in his room. The figure was standing by his bed, and it slowly walked around the bed, right past the bathroom door, where he was standing. Scared out of his mind, he ran out the other door, telling his girlfriend to get the keys to the car that they were leaving. In the car, he then told her what happened, and they did not return until almost 1 in the morning. The other stuff that happened to my dad affected his sleep. He told me there were times where he would have some of the worst nightmares, and he would wake up in a cold sweat. Some nights he felt like he was paralyzed and he couldn't move, yet he was still awake. He said he could open his eyes though, and when he did, he saw a woman standing at the end of his bed, staring down at him. He would try to call out and moan, but he could not get up. That is, until his girlfriend shook him awake. Now, he admits he wasn't sure if something was making him do this or not. But as soon as he moved out, the dreams never happened again. The sleep paralysis was gone. The last thing that ever happened to me happened again in the bathroom. I had gotten out of the shower and was standing in front of the mirror, wiping off the fog, when suddenly I swear I saw a face behind me. It was a woman, an old woman, although I couldn't make out many details. I quickly whipped around, only to find nothing behind me. I was horrified, and from then on I took showers in the guest bathroom. I never told Dad that story. I was too afraid he wouldn't believe it. I guess I just thought we were never on the same page with this paranormal happening. It wasn't until years later that he told me the rest of his stories, because he believed I was too young and I would be too scared to know what happened at the time. And since then, he's moved out and has never had anything paranormal like that happen again. But one of the first weeks after he moved out, he got a call from an unknown number. He said it was from some people who had been looking into buying the house. He asked, "How did you get my number? I am not the real estate agent in charge." But the man told him, "I found your number on the back of the card you left behind." My dad was very confused. There was no way they had gotten his phone number. He had finally gotten one and never left any card behind. He didn't know how his number had even gotten out, and why. The last thing he asked the man on the phone was, "Have you heard about the old woman who had lived there? Ever hear anything strange about the house?" The man answered, "No, I haven't." And my dad replied, "Oh, don't worry, you'll love the house and what comes with it."
My name is Brandon. I live with my parents and my cat, and I'm currently 14 years old. The story I'm about to share with you is very recent. It happened to me literally a year ago, and ever since, I've stopped watching horror movies and going to the kitchen, or really anywhere in the middle of the night. I barely even go outside to play and hang out with friends at night now because of this. Now let's get on with the story. My family and I had just moved to a new state, and we needed a place to stay. So for the time being, we decided to stay in an apartment complex. We ended up finding one that had just been built and was leasing to people. So me and my family decided to stay there for a couple of months. We got an apartment, and in a couple of days we already got settled in. The apartment had a smell of new to it. You know, when you get something brand new and it just has that smell. Honestly though, some places did smell a bit like paint. Our first few weeks there were okay, but the week after that I will never forget. On a Wednesday, I began to hear some weird tapping at my window. I went to investigate, but when I would look out, there would be nothing there. At the moment, I just assumed that it was either a tree that was actually outside my window or my blinds, so I just went back to sleep. But after 3 minutes of trying to sleep, I hear it again, but louder. Now it sounds like it's banging against the window. It was so loud now that I was scared. I quickly manned up and checked whatever was making the sound. But again, nothing was there. This process lasted for another 3 nights. I told my parents about it, but they just said it was probably the tree outside my window. Saturday, though, was the day that I'd never forget. My parents decided to throw away my cat's bed due to how dirty and damaged it was, and so my cat had to sleep in my room. My parents didn't want the cat hair all over their bed. That night, I was asleep, and my cat was sleeping under my bed. I was having pretty good dreams when all of a sudden, I woke up to this scratching sound. My cat was scratching at my door, most likely telling me she has to go eat or use her cat litter. So I got up to go let the door open for her so she could do her stuff. Now at this point my cat is clawing underneath the door as if she's trying to open the door herself somehow. But when I get up next to her to let her out, all of a sudden she jerks her paw away from underneath the door, like something had just touched her. That's strange, I thought, and I opened the door to let her out. But she wouldn't move. She just stayed in place, motionless. I picked her up and started to place her outside the door, but she suddenly got so scared that she wiggled out of my hands. She even actually clawed my hand so hard that I began to bleed. When she was on the ground, her tail lit up like a Christmas tree. I decided to see what she was so scared of. I looked out of the doorway, and that's when I saw it. From the dining room behind the chair was a dark figure. Because it was so dark, I could not identify if it was a man or a woman. But to me it kind of looked like a man. The only thing I could see clearly were the eyes, which were literally 2 red dots. I was so scared. I opened my mouth to scream, but no words came out. Immediately, I shut the door to my room and locked it. Now, I haven't mentioned this yet, but my apartment, the dining room, the kitchen, and the living room, as well as my parents' room, they're all connected. My room is down a tiny hallway that connects my room to the laundry room and bathroom. Basically, you could enter my room through the bathroom or the hallway. After I locked my room door, I quickly ran to the bathroom door to lock it as well. After that, I just jumped in my bed and hid under the covers. I could hear what sounded like footsteps just outside my room. Whatever was outside wasn't done, because I could hear the doorknob turn. But since it was locked, whatever was out there could not get in, thank God. After 3 more attempts, everything just went to silence. Whatever was out there was gone. For the rest of the night, I didn't get any sleep. And when it was light outside and I went to go tell my parents, well, they shrugged it off and said everything was probably a dream. Ever since that day, nothing has happened like that. To be honest, that is really the only straightforward paranormal thing that has ever happened to me, and it still gives me chills every time I think about it. All that I know now is that I will never forget what happened that night. When I was about 4, my family and I had to move. My family consisted of my dad, my baby sister, and my mom. The 4 of us moved into a creepy old house with an ugly green door. When I walked in with my family, the atmosphere was very unsettling. When my dad went into the kitchen, he found a Ouija board on the floor. No joke. So when he saw it, he threw it out immediately. It gave us a bit of insight as to who lived here before. But after he threw it out, some scary stuff started to go down in the house. One day, I was playing in my room, and I had this big play horse that had a big spring that when you played on it, the spring would bend back and forth. So, as I was saying, the horse started to rock back and forth, yet I wasn't on it. I never even touched it. When I looked up, I saw that no one was around to have moved it. So I asked who's there, and I could faintly see a little pale-faced child, no more than 4 years old. She wasn't there, and then she was. Before there was no one on the horse, and the next time I blinked, she was there on it playing. It was crazy. She was on the horse giggling and laughing, and when I said who's there, she looked at me and smiled, and I did the same. I said, "Do you want to play?" And she said yes. I was very happy to have someone to play with. This little girl and I would play all day and night. I remember it very well. That night she told me her name was Emily. But on that very same night, we both heard footsteps coming up the stairs, and we were both terrified. I went to my mom quickly and asked if she heard them too, but she said she didn't. Then Emily disappeared when the footsteps stopped at the top of the stairs. The next day I saw her again. We played and we had lots of fun together. I guess a part of the fun was the fact that my sister was only 1, and I really didn't have anyone to hang out with. A few hours later, 2 more people appeared. They were her brother Brian and her mom Tracy. Her mom said that they'd been looking all over for her, and Emily said, "Mommy, look, I made a friend." Her mother just sat down and let us all play together. A few more hours later, and it was about 3:30 in the afternoon, things took a bit of a dark turn. I heard those footsteps again, and this time they sounded louder than the last. We all looked at each other in horror. There was something about these footsteps that resonated evil. Then I looked at my door, and it opened, and behind it there was this big black mass with glowing red eyes in the middle. I couldn't make it out very well, but something told me that this was their father. Everyone tried to run away. They were in a panic, but they couldn't, because the black mass had a hold of all of them. It wrapped around their feet, and I held on to Emily, trying to pull her free. Things got even darker. The black mass spoke to me in a very demonic voice. He told me, "They're mine." The black mass then wrapped itself around my waist, and I started to scream. I could feel a very sharp, stabbing cold sensation on my side, right above my hip. Emily screamed at her dad to put me down. He didn't, he just started to hold me tighter and tighter. That pain, it was one of the most painful things in my life. I started to scream even louder, and I was crying. Then Emily's mom put her foot down and told him to put me down now. She sounded so protective, so motherly. When she said that, the mass with its sharp fingers like needles were in my skin. It put me down, and it grabbed his wife by the neck. and a few seconds after, the woman went limp. At that moment, I closed my eyes and I prayed all the prayers that I knew. I prayed to Saint Michael, the Archangel. I prayed to God. After closing my eyes and praying for what felt like an eternity, I opened them, and they were all gone. No one was in the room with me. The black mass had disappeared, along with the woman, the boy, and Emily. I was so terrified that I ran to my mother. I tried to tell her about the people, about Emily, about everyone that I had been seeing. And of course, it was written off as imaginary friends, a little girl's imagination. I know this sounds bizarre, but this memory is very true, and it is still so vivid in my mind that it gives me chills just thinking about it. When all those spirits were gone, even the not-so-bad ones, the air just felt better in that place. But I was always nervous that they'd come back. I missed Emily, but I was worried that if she came back, so would the Black Mass.
My name is Tyler, and I'm from Saginaw, Michigan. As a kid, I grew up suffering from croup. It's a terrible illness that literally leaves you breathless. When I was 2, I had to be rushed into the hospital from it. And again when I was 7. I remember this event fairly greatly. I was staying at my grandparents' house as per usual. My mother was working all night and going to school to become a nurse during the day. So my grandparents, my sister, and I would stay with them most of the time. It's a beautiful place in Shields. Half of it was rebuilt by my grandfather himself. My mother and uncle have their own stories of this house being haunted, which may explain my experience here. I was around 7, my mother says. The day was an average fall day. My sister and I spent our day playing in a pile of leaves my grandfather made for us. After playing, we went inside, had our supper, and we went to bed shortly after. I don't remember too much else during that day. Now, you should know, we did share a bedroom there. We had 2 separate beds. I remember someone staying with my grandparents all night. I assumed it was a friend of my grandma's. Well, when we went to bed, I bunked with my sister so that my grandma's friend could have her own bed. We closed our eyes and drifted off to sleep without much of a wait. Then, I woke up. There was a deafening ringing sound all around me. Everything seemed to be gray. The ringing drowned out any sound and even drowned itself out, if that makes any sense. Things were silent, yet loud. I don't know how else to say it. But what was really freaking me out was the face in front of my own. It was an old, gray woman. She didn't look anything other than neutral, just a blank face. I was staring at her, struggling to breathe. My grandparents rushed in, and the woman seemed to fade. She was still there, just clouded. The next thing I remember is waking up. Everything was white. It wasn't the brightest light I've ever seen so much as everything was just light. A figure was there, coming close it seemed, almost gliding. In an instant, it was right in front of me, and it was the same woman. She said I was not ready, and it's not for me yet. Then I woke up in the hospital with my mother right next to me. She was crying. I told her that they said it's not my time. And the rest after that is very fuzzy. I don't know who or what that woman was, but I think she was a reaper or something. For who, I don't know, because this time it wasn't me. I recently recalled this experience because I moved back into this old house after all these years. I'm around 22 and I have a 2-year-old daughter of my own. Recently, she had to go to the hospital because of her own attacks with the croup, and I hope that that reaper woman never has to visit her like she came to me. After a long shift at work, I headed over to my friend's flat as he had just moved in. Let's call him Ryan. After sitting with Ryan and his other flatmate, we got invited to his friend's flat, just upstairs. My friends started telling me a few weird things that were happening in the flat, but nothing as scary as what I encountered. They told me they would hear indie songs, usually Catfish and the Bottlemen, so they soon called the ghost the Indie Ghost. None of this made me particularly worried, as it didn't seem that scary. and I just thought it may have been other people in the block or flats playing music loudly, so we carried on and had a bit of a laugh. I don't remember what we were laughing about, but something made me laugh hard, and the beanie that was perched on my head fell behind my neck. I thought it was a bit warm, so I leaned forward and let it fall behind my back, so I was sitting on it. The room got colder even though there was about 5 people in there. One person left the room to go to bed, but I didn't know them very well, so they waved me goodbye and didn't come near me. The only person near me then was Ryan, and he was sat on the other end of the sofa. I should mention that this was a sofa with 3 seats. I was sat on the left and Ryan was on the very right-hand side. Ryan was wrapped up in a blanket. He was feeling a little bit cold, but nothing too bad. Nobody else was feeling this cold except me and Ryan. This is the part where it gets really weird. After realizing I had not gone in a while, I felt a sudden urge to go to the bathroom. So I got up and asked where the bathroom was. I opened the living room door, walked down the hallway and opened the bathroom door. Without setting foot inside the bathroom, I could see the toilet, and when I looked in, inside the toilet bowl was my hat, turned upside down. I felt utterly shocked, and thoughts raced around my head about who did it, and what I was going to say, and wondering about how the others would react. I thought they all may have been in on it, and I was not happy about that. Then it dawned on me. Ryan was the only one that could have been close enough to me to take the hat, but he was wrapped up tightly and half asleep. The only person that left the room that could have possibly got up and went to the bathroom to put my beanie inside the toilet came nowhere near me and only waved. That was when I began to feel cold and unwelcome there. The air in the flat had changed, and I felt like I was being watched all the time. I went through to the living room and asked if anybody knew about it. But everybody was as shocked as I was, and they kept asking me, "Are you sure you didn't walk to the toilet and it fell off your head?" I assured them I did not step foot inside that room before. Hell, I even had to ask them where the bathroom was. And even if somehow, some weird way that it had fallen off my head and I had forgotten about it, after I picked it up out of the toilet, I would have joked about it, or at least quietly put it in my bag and not mention how silly I had been. I went back to the flat yesterday, but I still felt that cold and unwelcoming presence, and I didn't take my hat off once.
This story of mine may not be as creepy as other people's experiences, but it happened, and I would like to tell somebody about it. I lived on a farm for about 12 years of my life, and my entire family knew that it was haunted. It was nothing malicious or anything like that. There was an energy there. We heard voices sometimes inside of the house when we were alone, or we'd see dark flashes out of the corners of our eyes. Not to mention some of the things that happened on the farm itself. We've moved out since then to a more modern house, but that still doesn't change the fact that I have seen and heard some weird things. The farm that my brother and I were raised on was built in the early 1900s. The house that we grew up in was just as old, and our landlord that owned the property never fixed or rebuilt anything so much as put band-aids on the old barns. You know, we paint a building here, replace some wood there, you get the picture. Nothing was ever truly fixed or replaced. So, all of that territory was almost 100 years old and falling apart. The layout of our backyard was like this. You come out of the back door and come to a fence with an opening to a very small bridge crossing over a creek. This was drinking water for the cows. Then you get to the barns. When you got past the barns for the cows, horses, and farm equipment, you got to the pastures where the cows and horses grazed. And then there was a fence, and past that a mountain that I used to hike up all the time. Roughly, the farm was 144 acres of land, and my brother and I felt blessed to be raised in a place where we had a mountain in our backyard, and across the street and on either side of us. It was the Blue Ridge Mountains, and they were everywhere. From our place in the valley, the clouds and the night skies were beautiful too. It was all picture perfect. Well, seemingly. I used to walk into the pasture with my iPod in my pocket and earbuds in my ears, listening to music as I made my way to the mountain for some exercise. The one past the pasture. This particular incident didn't happen until after I was hiking back down, at maybe 1 or 2 in the afternoon, broad daylight. I saw some thunderclouds forming in the sky, and I figured that I could stay for a minute or 2 to watch the clouds gather. I remember, although I had my earbuds in, I paused the music to listen for thunder, but there wasn't any. I stopped a ways from the fence, a bit into the pasture. No cows were present. They were all across the street in another grazing field. And that's when I saw it. As I gazed up into the sky at those clouds, maybe 20 yards away from me and just out of the corner of my eye, I saw something black move. It looked like a man walking along the fence away from me, on my side of the fence, so we were both in the pasture. I turned to look in surprise, because I swore that I'd been the only one out there for seconds before. It had the thick build of a man, and the rounded shape at the top of his head suggested that he had no hair, and I could tell it was a man by the build of his body. I also knew that on the other side of the mountain there were hunters sometimes looking for deer or fox, but none of them had ever come into our farm. However, in retrospect, I realized that no human could have been pure black like that. It wasn't dark out, but I turned to look at him and he was a shadow. But one moment he was there, and the next it was gone. There was nothing. I stared and scanned the area over and over, figuring it must have been me being tired. I mean, I had just hiked up and down a mountain after all. And I turned back to the sky. But was that the end? No, I saw that shadow man again. This time, instead of walking along the fence, he was facing me. His legs were moving towards me, and I tried to keep my eyes on the clouds so I could keep this weird shadow man in my peripheral vision. I did not want to lose sight of him this time. It was so utterly bizarre to me, because at that point I was in middle school and had lived on the farm for over a freaking decade, and I'd never seen such a clear, physical entity such as this. I wanted to stay and see what would happen as he got closer to me. My morbid sense of curiosity compelled me to stay in one place and watch it out of the corner of my eye. Until a figure began to run towards me. I saw legs lift quickly, arms pumping, head lowered, all in a matter of seconds. It's been many years, and I still remember how he geared off from simple walking to running right at me. And I still remember how, after just a split second doubting my sanity, I could hear the rapid fall of its feet. I heard it running towards me, what looked like the shadow of a fully grown man moving, and I was frozen in place. As soon as the fact that not only was I seeing it, but it was making a sound that I could hear, I turned and began to sprint towards my house like never before. At the time, I don't know why, but all that I could think of was getting to the bridge, the one with the creek running water. Right below it was between my house and the farm. I was a huge Tim Burton fan and remembered this from Sleepy Hollow, in what was probably my mind trying to convince me that I was going to be safe if I got to the running water. That old ghosts can't cross running water kind of thing. I remember trying to listen for its footsteps, but to be honest, I couldn't tell which was the figure running, and which was me or the pounding of my heart. I just remember watching out for cow patties and trying to listen, but even as I reached the bridge, I did not stop running. I still felt like I was being followed. I flung open the back door of my house and slammed it shut behind me. I finally breathed a sigh of relief and locked it. I looked out of the windows and saw nothing. When I told my mom about the experience, she and I had a pretty long conversation that pretty much summed it up to, "We've all seen weird things around here, but it was never evil." Well, while I'm not sure whether the shadow person was evil or not, he was definitely running at me at full speed. If you think that shadow people, a legitimate form of spirits, are supposed to run away from you as soon as you see them, think again. Like people, everyone is different. Maybe I had just pissed this one off because I'd seen it. Maybe I was in the wrong place at the wrong time. Maybe it was evil and I escaped something that could have been deadly, especially with all the old farm equipment lying around with the thunderstorm building. All I really know is nothing like that ever happened again. And I hope that that shadow man was just passing through, and that he does not bother anyone living in that house ever again. And especially, don't come back to visit me. I believe in all things paranormal, although I haven't had too many experiences of my own. I have had my things moved around and show up in odd places. I've been in my room and I hear voices coming from the hallway. They sound like a party is going on, only to open the door and find that everything is silent and still. These are weird voices that I just can't explain. You know, just little stuff like that. But there was one experience that happened about a year and a half ago. I'm a 22-year-old female living with my mom in our 2-bed, 2-bath apartment. I do need to explain the layout of the apartment so you can understand better. Our apartment at the time was located at the very far end of the complex. Next to the apartment was the maintenance office, so the maintenance guy always had his truck parked there. And in that corner is a decent shining light. From my kitchen window that's above the sink, I can see the truck. And from my mom's bathroom window, you can also see the truck. So we can pretty much see this corner area from the kitchen and my mom's bathroom. Now, for the story. It was around 3 in the morning. I'm always up pretty late because I'm a night owl. I went to the kitchen to get a snack, and on the way back to my room I realized I'd forgotten my drink. I left my snack in my room and went back to the kitchen. I noticed there wasn't a trash bag in the bin, so I figured I might as well do it. That way I didn't have to worry about it later. As I'm opening the trash bag, I get this sudden strong feeling that I'm being watched. I looked up and I see a man looking right at me, dead in the eyes. He looked at me with the most hateful look I've ever seen anyone give someone. He looked at me as if I had ruined his life, as if I had taken his most prized possessions away. It was just so hateful and angry. It was completely dark in my kitchen, the only light on being the stove light, which is very dim, so it doesn't provide enough to see anybody. But we stare at each other for about 2 seconds before my fight or flight kicks in. Finally, I run to my room. My heart is pounding, and I remembered my mom's window. Slowly and cautiously, I went in and looked. I didn't see him, and no one was around. Mind you, this all happened within seconds of seeing the guy. And for 2 reasons, this situation does not make any sense. Reason number 1, the next morning I went outside the apartment, and I could barely see into the kitchen, let alone be able to make direct eye contact with someone inside, despite it being the afternoon with more light out. Reason number 2, the bright light I mentioned that's next to the maintenance man's truck. If it had been a bum, someone just wandering around the complex that's not supposed to be there, it just wouldn't make any sense to be standing in the most lit area of the place. This story might be short, but it's very confusing and very, very frightening. I get really intense chills when I think about this, and even as I'm typing it, I have major goosebumps. I will never forget that evil look he gave me.
To be completely honest, I've always been a firm believer in the paranormal, and I've always been interested in it. I would watch ghost hunting shows and horror movies. Despite my parents' clear discomfort for my interests, I've always suspected something was going on in my house. And one day, I got confirmation. One day I was playing with 2 of the neighbor girls. In respect of their privacy, I will not say their actual names. The youngest was sitting on the wall near the gate, and I thought she looked adorable. I have a habit of taking pictures of things I found beautiful, so it took me 2 seconds to whip out my phone and take a picture of her. I didn't examine it until later that night. I was lying in bed when I saw it. There was an orb in the photo. For those of you who don't know what an orb is, it's a sphere of light that appears in the photo, which is presumed to be a soul of a deceased person. Many brush off orbs in photos as light from a shard of glass on the sidewalk or just a glare, but I knew that wasn't the case, because it was dusk when I took the photo. It was nearly dark out. The orb was right next to her head. I couldn't help but get both excited and nervous. I got up from my bed and started taking pictures around my house with the flash on, hoping I wasn't some crazy weirdo. I looked through them all, and to my surprise, I saw another orb. This time it was larger, and the picture was taken down the passage to my room where it was dark. And of course, I decided to talk to the little girl's mother. Their house is on the same property as ours, so I wanted to know if I wasn't just imagining something. But I found out my suspicions were pretty accurate. Their mother told me stories of how the towel would shake violently when she was bathing, and that things would go missing and turn up in places that they'd never expect. I was pretty satisfied with my findings, but I was freaked out at the same time. My property was apparently cursed. How many people do you know who could say that? The next night, I was texting my boyfriend late at night, with my bedroom light on. Eventually, I got really tired and I said goodnight to him. I put my phone on the charger and I reached for the light switch above me. I flipped it, plunging the room right into darkness. And that's when I heard it. It was the most blood-curdling scream, and it was coming from right next to me. Never have I jumped up so fast, and never has my body been covered in goose flesh so quickly. I switched the light on, and my heart was pounding. I kept asking myself, what was that? Was I dreaming? When I calmed down, I felt ready to switch off the lights again. But the moment I did, the scream came again, booming through the house. I was shaking and in tears, and I switched on the light. I could tell by the scream that this ghost was a she, but I didn't care. I just wanted her to leave me the hell alone. At the very least, let me sleep. I have no idea how I slept that night, but eventually and painstakingly, I did. A few days later, I approached my friends about the ghost in my house. They were believers too, so we decided to set up a sleepover at my place to do some videotaping and EVPs, or voice recordings, to see if we could catch anything else. Unfortunately though, my friend Abby was the only one brave enough to actually show up. We decided to do it in my neighbor's house this time, because my parents would have killed me if they realized what I was doing. The mother, let's call her Jocelyn, had been really cool with it. Her kids were at their father's house that night, not to mention she wanted some solid evidence for herself, so she allowed it, as long as she could stay. The night seemed to be a bust. We caught nothing on our recorders or cameras, not even an orb. But that soon changed. While Abby and I were trying to be ghost hunters, Jocelyn had been sending voice notes to her friends in the kitchen. In the middle of us trying to record, she called us into the kitchen with her. She looked really freaked out. We asked what was wrong, and she proceeded to explain that she was going over 3 voice notes she had sent to a guy, and he hadn't replied in 15 minutes. So out of boredom, she listened to her last 3 voice notes herself. She played them all for us. The first one was completely normal. She was talking normally and clearly. But then she played the second recording. It sounded like something out of a horror film. There was this otherworldly, malicious growl, like it was some demon right next to her. And then she played her third recording, and it was completely normal. No human could have made that noise. I knew nothing good would come of it if I didn't do something about it. So I took some olive oil and painted crosses on the doorposts of each door, and I prayed over it. But that night, I dreamt that one of my friends had been chased by a clown, and I tried to save her, but I fell into a body of water, and I drowned. Drowning is my worst fear, so I just had to tell Abby about it when I went to school on Monday. Abby looked at me wide-eyed and said, "Whoa, don't tell Cameron, because clowns are his worst fear." That was weird. I swear to God, I had no idea clowns were his worst fear. Cameron and I weren't close at all, so the news shocked me. Luckily though, the dream was probably a parting gift to whatever was in my house, because nothing else has happened. Not since I blessed the place. It's been 2 years later, and it's still really creepy. I can't help but wonder what would have happened if I didn't do something about whatever that thing was. Let's hope I never find out, and that it never comes back. At the time of this story, my family lived on a 400-acre farm, and we saw many ghosts there, but most were friendly, and as long as we didn't mess with them, they didn't mess with us. Sometimes they even helped. For example, if we were looking for something and we just looked on a table and it wasn't there, we'd look again a minute later, it was there somehow. While this story isn't as scary as most of the other stories I've heard on these channels, when I was younger, it scared the absolute hell out of me. Of course, I don't remember a lot when I was 3. I do remember one horrifying day, though. It all started when I was sleeping in my mom and dad's room in my crib, and I suddenly woke up hearing a voice. I don't remember how I felt about it because I was so young, but after a minute, I looked to my left towards the wall, and out of it a skeleton-type face appeared, and it laughed quietly. I started screaming, and I woke up my parents. As they were waking up, the face faded away with a smile on it. From the few words I could speak at the time, my parents knew I wanted to sleep with them, so they let me. The next day, I was at the kitchen table, and my brother runs in the room with the mask. which was the same exact face I saw on the wall the night before. Of course, I started screaming. That is all I remember from that age, and later I learned that my brother randomly found that mask outside the day after my first experience. It wasn't until I was about 9 when I remember seeing that mask again, on my bed, lying against the wall, looking at me. At this point, my brother was moved out, so he couldn't have been trying to scare me, and I was scared out of my mind of my room. So I asked to sleep with my parents again, and they let me. It wasn't until a few nights later that I started to sleep in my own room again, and it just so happened I woke up in the middle of the night with that mask floating right above me. We were making eye contact. As soon as I saw it, I screamed again, and it fell onto me, and right after that my dad ran into my room. After that experience, only a few times more did I see it, but it would only be laying on the counter or in the living room. Since then, my parents have split up, and my mom did something to me and my dad, so now I don't really want to see her for a while. I'm living with my dad in his new place, and I haven't seen that mask since, and I'm still not quite sure what the thing using the mask was, and I don't really want to know.
This event took place back in the end of January of 2016. I have some beliefs in the whole spirit thing, but never really had much evidence to go off of until that night back in January. Let me give you some background about where I live. I live alone in a single-room apartment in a college town in the Pacific Northwest. I live on the second floor of my apartment building. The new semester had just started and half of the people, including my neighbor across from me and above me, the only two people I had a chance to meet since I moved there, had moved out in December. I hadn't really had the chance yet to talk or get to know my new neighbors. So one night I get back to my apartment from a long day on campus and I start watching some TV. Around 7:30 p.m. I hear a few faint knocks, but I blew it off because I thought it was someone knocking at my neighbor's door. A few minutes pass by and I hear it again, so I get up and I look through my peephole, and there was no one there. I think nothing of it and I continue to watch my TV. A couple of hours later I hear it again, and at this point I'm still trying to just ignore it. And a few more minutes passed and again I hear it a fourth time. Finally I get up and go look through my peephole, and nothing. As weird as I thought it was, I just told myself someone was probably just pulling a dumb prank. Around 11 that night I got tired, so I went to bed. About 5 minutes after I got in bed, in a very soft, faint girl's voice, I heard someone say, "Hello, Austin." My heart sank into my stomach instantly and I froze there for a solid 10 minutes. The reason I froze, and what I think is the most chilling part of this experience, is that no one at this time in my apartment complex knew my name. The next few nights I ended up sleeping with the lights on, and by the time I was finally calmed down and getting past it, it got worse. In my apartment, if you walk straight out of my room, you'll be in the bathroom. Well, one night, even with the lights on, I was walking out of my room to the bathroom, and I had this weird feeling in my stomach. I looked up into the mirror of my bathroom, and I swear to God, I saw a little girl's face on my bed, looking at me straight back in my room. I was not able to sleep for a few weeks after that. No one except me and my close friends knows of this experience. That is, until now. At the time of this story, I was living in Las Vegas, Nevada. I'm now in Highlands Ranch, Colorado. Back then, I was in 6th grade when the story was taking place. So this happened one day as I was going to bed, and I couldn't really sleep, so I started staring outside. Then I looked at the closet door, and I saw a shadow reflected on it. But it was night and no lights were on and the windows and curtains were closed, so I had no idea how any shadow could have been reflected at all. I'm lying down now staring at the shadow reflecting on the closet door, and it starts moving with the breeze in the room. It was like a little girl playing soccer. Soon I turned away and I looked back, and the little girl was looking directly at me. I tried to ignore it, I tried to fall asleep, but I couldn't. The bedroom door was wide open, and I stared down the hallway and heard footsteps of running around the apartment and giggling, but everyone was asleep. and who would be laughing in the middle of the house at night? I looked up to see what seemed to be a silhouette going into my mother's room. And after that, I turned to face the wall, and I swear at that moment I heard someone say, "Get out or die." After we moved out, I have not been to those apartments. In June of 2012, my family and I left Las Vegas, and we moved to Taylorsville, Utah. I was 16, and soon we got a new place, but the haunting continued. The house was a 4-bedroom place with 2 bedrooms upstairs and 2 downstairs. I chose the room closest to the bathroom upstairs, which was also nearest to the backyard. One night, I was up all night on the phone talking to my friend, now boyfriend, until 8 a.m. in the morning. It got really cold in the room, but both windows were closed. I proceeded to pull the covers over me, as it felt like an iceberg had drifted into my bedroom. And then it felt like something was touching me. There was no one there, and each time I switched sides I was still being touched. It felt like a hand caressing under my neck, and I was completely motionless and quiet for a good minute. And I heard my name called from downstairs. It sounded very faint, but I heard it. "Andrea!" Then I walked downstairs. I heard what sounded like laughing, but again everyone was asleep. After that day, I started to have these dreams. Dreams about a little girl who had been killed in the lake that was behind our house. The first time I dreamt it, I woke up with what looked like marks that someone had been choking me. I couldn't make any sense of all of it. And still, to this day, I think about it. It's hard to explain, but it gives me chills.